There's a dangerous mistake people make when discussing relationships. They assume betrayal always looks dramatic. A lipstick stain, a suspicious text, a sudden disappearance. But real psychology says something very different. Most emotional deception does not begin with obvious evidence. It begins with microscopic behavioral shifts, tiny fractures in warmth, subtle changes in eye contact, a nervous hand movement, an unnatural smile that arrives half a second too late. And the terrifying part? The human brain notices these things long before conscious awareness does. That strange feeling in your chest, that tension you cannot explain, that sense that something feels off. Behavioral psychologists call this thin slicing, the brain's ability to detect hidden social patterns subconsciously before logic catches up. And throughout history, researchers, therapists, detectives, negotiators, and behavioral analysts have all discovered the same unsettling truth. Human beings leak emotional truth through behavior. Not always intentionally, not always consciously, but consistently. Today, we're going deeper than surface-level dating advice. Because this video is not about paranoia, it is not about attacking women, and it is definitely not about turning relationships into interrogations. This is about understanding behavioral psychology, emotional stress responses, unconscious guilt mechanisms, and how major emotional experiences can temporarily reshape human interaction patterns. And to make this real, you're going to hear 5 true stories, real people, real relationships, real behavioral shifts that psychologists later analyzed in ways that completely changed how others understood human attachment, guilt, deception, and emotional conflict. Each story reveals one specific psychological pattern, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why the human body often reveals what words desperately try to hide. Story 1. The sudden warmth. In 2015, a man named Daniel from Manchester shared his experience during a relationship counseling case later discussed in behavioral therapy circles online. Daniel said something strange started happening with his girlfriend, Rebecca. For months, the relationship had become emotionally cold. Short conversations, distance, no affection, no emotional enthusiasm. Then suddenly, everything changed overnight. Rebecca became intensely affectionate. She started sending long, loving messages again. She initiated physical closeness constantly. She cooked for him unexpectedly. She laughed more, touched him more, praised him more. At first, Daniel felt relieved. Most people would, because emotionally deprived people are starving for reassurance. But after several weeks, he described a strange emotional sensation. The affection felt heavy, not fake, not robotic, but emotionally overcompensated, almost like someone trying too hard to restore emotional balance. Months later, Daniel discovered she had briefly become emotionally involved with someone from work during the exact period the love surge began. Now pause there, because this is where psychology becomes fascinating. Researchers studying cognitive dissonance discovered that when human beings act against their personal moral framework, the brain experiences internal psychological tension. The mind hates contradiction, so it unconsciously attempts to restore equilibrium. One common mechanism is called compensatory behavior. This means the guilty individual suddenly increases positive behavior toward the person they psychologically feel they harmed. More warmth, more generosity, more emotional reassurance. Not because they are evil, but because guilt creates emotional pressure, and emotional pressure seeks release. This is why therapists often say, behavior after betrayal is sometimes kinder before it becomes distant. That sentence shocks many people, but behavior science has documented this pattern repeatedly. And here's the critical distinction. Natural affection feels relaxed. Guilt-driven affection often feels performative, subtly intense, slightly over-calculated. emotionally louder than usual. Your nervous system notices the difference even when your conscious mind cannot explain it. That's the terrifying brilliance of human intuition. Story 2. The Phone That Became a Vault. In 2018, relationship researcher Dr. Catherine Hertlein discussed a case involving a woman named Melissa during a seminar about digital secrecy and emotional concealment. Her husband noticed something very specific. Not suspicious texts, not obvious lies, a behavioral transition. Melissa used to leave her phone anywhere. Kitchen counter, bedside table, sofa cushions, completely relaxed. Then, gradually, her relationship with the device changed. She started holding it constantly, tilting the screen away, taking it into the bathroom, flipping it face down instantly whenever notifications appeared. Again. The phone itself was not the real signal. The signal was the behavioral shift. This matters enormously in psychology, because the brain forms unconscious protection rituals around emotionally threatening information. Researchers call this defensive behavioral adaptation. The object carrying the secret becomes psychologically charged. And once that happens, the body begins guarding it automatically. That's why people hiding major emotional information often develop hyper-awareness around certain objects. Phones, laptops, specific conversations, specific locations. The fascinating part? Many do this unconsciously. Their nervous system reacts before conscious planning does, and this creates measurable physical responses. Increased alertness, tension spikes, rapid screen covering, protective body angles. Behavioral experts studying deception also found something deeply important. People under concealment stress often monitor proximity, meaning they constantly track where others are in relation to the hidden information source, not because they are master manipulators, but because anxiety creates surveillance behavior. And once you understand this, you stop looking only for evidence. You start noticing emotional friction patterns. That's where human truth usually leaks first. Story 3. The Strange Silence in Physical Intimacy. One of the most emotionally painful stories came from a couples therapist in Chicago involving a man named Marcus and his wife Elena. Marcus described a feeling he could never properly explain. She was there, but she wasn't there. That sentence haunted him, because outwardly, nothing looked catastrophic. No screaming arguments, no dramatic collapse. But during moments of closeness, Elena felt emotionally absent, physically present, mentally distant. And eventually Marcus noticed two alternating patterns. Sometimes she completely avoided intimacy. Other times she suddenly became unusually open to it, but emotionally disconnected during the experience itself, almost mechanical, almost detached. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as dissociative intimacy response, and it can emerge during periods of emotional conflict, guilt, identity stress, or unresolved attachment confusion. Now this is very important. This pattern is not exclusive to betrayal. Trauma, depression, emotional burnout, anxiety, and psychological overload can also produce similar behaviors. That distinction matters ethically and psychologically. But what fascinated researchers was the consistency of one principle. The body struggles to synchronize emotional presence when internal conflict becomes severe. Human intimacy is not purely physical. It is neurological, hormonal, psychological, emotional. Studies involving oxytocin, dopamine, and attachment bonding repeatedly showed that emotionally significant physical experiences temporarily reshape emotional processing patterns afterward. And during internal conflict, that reshaping becomes behaviorally visible, not through dramatic confessions, through emotional absence, a delayed reaction, reduced responsiveness, mechanical affection, avoidant closeness. The body reveals fragmentation long before language does. Story 4. The person who explained too much. A forensic communication analyst once described a real interrogation-adjacent behavioral study involving workplace deception. One participant named Laura showed something fascinating. Nobody accused her of anything. Nobody pressured her. But whenever simple questions appeared, she over-explained everything. "Where were you after work?" Instead of a normal response, she delivered a 5-minute timeline. Every stop, every detail, every justification. Behavior analysts immediately recognize the pattern, because deceptive stress often produces preemptive narrative construction. The person unconsciously tries to answer accusations that were never spoken aloud. And this creates communication abnormalities, too many details, over-clarification, defensive tone shifts, excessive explanations for ordinary events. But here's where it becomes even more fascinating. Researchers studying deception physiology discovered something called the Pinocchio effect. No, not literally nose growth, but measurable increases in face-touching behavior during stressful deception states, particularly around the nose, the mouth, the neck. Why? Because stress activates subtle physiological responses involving blood flow, irritation sensations, and nervous system regulation behaviors. Deception pressure also alters blink rate, voice pitch, speech pacing. Again, not always consciously. The body reacts before the mind stabilizes itself. This is why trained investigators rarely focus only on words. They study behavioral clusters, because isolated behaviors mean little. But patterns tell stories. Story 5. When normal feels too perfect. A therapist from Toronto once described a couple who appeared completely healthy socially. Dinner photos, vacation smiles, public laughter, everything looked normal. But privately, the husband kept saying the same sentence. "It feels rehearsed." That word is psychologically devastating. Rehearsed. Because authentic emotional connection is naturally messy. Real couples interrupt each other, laugh unpredictably, sit in silence comfortably, react spontaneously. But emotionally strained people often begin performing normality instead of living it. Psychologists sometimes describe this as artificial relational maintenance. The relationship becomes a stage performance designed to preserve external stability while internal tension quietly grows underneath. And the human nervous system detects this, even subconsciously. That's why people often say, "I can't explain it, but something changed." Their brain is detecting emotional incongruence, a mismatch between surface behavior and emotional authenticity. And neuroscience suggests something extraordinary. Humans are remarkably sensitive to micro-inconsistencies, tiny delays in laughter, slightly unnatural enthusiasm, emotion that arrives too perfectly timed. Your conscious mind may miss it. Your nervous system often does not. Which explains why intuition feels so physically real. Sometimes the body understands before language does. Now, before this video ends, something extremely important must be said. None of these signs alone prove betrayal. Not one. Stress can create them. Depression can create them. Burnout can create them. Emotional disconnection can create them. Personal crises can create them. Behavioral psychology is about probabilities and patterns, not magical certainty. And mature people do not weaponize psychology against the people they love. They use awareness to create honest conversations. Because sometimes what looks like betrayal is actually emotional loneliness, unresolved resentment, attachment injury, or silent psychological exhaustion inside the relationship. And those things can sometimes be healed, if both people are willing to confront reality honestly. But healing becomes impossible when people ignore the signals completely. That's why awareness matters. Because awareness is where truth begins. And truth, even painful truth, is always better than emotional blindness. If this video gave you something real to think about, subscribe now. Every week, this channel breaks down the hidden psychology of relationships, attraction, emotional behavior, deception, attachment, and the strange ways human beings reveal themselves without realizing it. And in the comments, tell me which of these 5 behavioral signs felt the most psychologically revealing to you, because your insight might help someone else understand a situation they've been silently struggling to explain for years. Before you leave, understand this. Some women don't avoid female circles because they're different. Sometimes it's psychology. Sometimes it's emotional survival. Sometimes it's years of silent social conditioning nobody ever noticed. And the next video will completely change how you see it. Now appearing on your screen, the hidden psychology of women who prefer male friends. Watch it now. And if you enjoy deep psychological analysis, human behavior, and relationship science, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.